Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Jacob Licklater here, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is the show where I take a look at every classic Doctor Who story, one episode a day, one day per week. And today, on the 14th of April, 2018, we are starting Season 8 of Doctor Who with John Pertwee's second season, with Terror of the Autons, Episode 1. And I have to say that Terror of the Autons starts off to a really, really decent start. We open, not with the Doctor, but at the surface, and we hear the noise of the TARDIS arriving, except a horse box appears. So it's obviously not the Doctor's TARDIS. A man steps out who is obviously not the Doctor. The ringleader of the circus is understandably a bit taken aback, because who is this random guy who just shows up at my circus? Which again, my sort of an interesting way to start things out. And, it turns out that this guy he introduces himself as the Master and hypnotizes the guy, and then takes him on to steal the Auton control sphere, which was left on Earth from Spearhead from Space. So this is, as the title would suggest, this is a direct sequel to Spearhead from Space. And I have to say, the story actually works pretty well, considering it's at least starting out for this first episode as a direct sequel. You have we don't get too much. We don't quite know how the Autons are going to take over the Earth and why the Master is working with them, and what his plan is. But we see him take over a plastics factory, much like in Spearhead from Space, and hypnotize. And he seems to be really, really skilled at hypnosis. And he's played by the wonderful Roger Delgado, and basically his plan here is he's not really we don't really know his plan yet, but the Doctor obviously knows him, and sadly, though, after this scene with them breaking and stealing the sphere, we cut over to the Doctor, who has a new companion. Sadly, Liz Shaw has left off screen, which is quite sad, because Liz was a really, really fun character. I wish she would have stayed around longer, but hey, we enter Jo Grant, who is assigned as the Doctor's new assistant, and rather funnily, the Doctor simply says, "Nah, I don't want a new assistant. Liz was perfectly fine as she was, and just simply the prospect of getting a new assistant basically sort of screws with the Doctor's head a little bit, and it's actually really funny. I like the way the Doctor's like, no, she can't be my new assistant. I need a scientist. And the breeder even says, no, you just need someone to pass, like Liz said, you just need someone to pass you your test tubes and tell you how smart you are. And Jo, she's taken science in O-levels, and I mean, she's fully trained, which is, at least good for the Doctor's purposes. Like, he's not going to get someone, a complete amateur. And so much so that she even goes to investigate the plastics factory on her own, but that gets her hypnotized by the Master, and she comes back and causes the episode's cliffhanger, which involves her unlocking a bomb and getting ready for it to go off, which is a really solid cliffhanger. I have to say, I really like the cliffhanger of this episode, and I really, really like Jo as a character. Katie Manning plays her with such aplomb, and she and John Pertwee get along very well even after these couple of things. Like, you have, she's they already hit it off, and we have the Doctor investigating this power complex where the Master took control of this power complex and shrunk one of the technicians and stuffed him in his lunchbox. This is where the Doctor figures out that the Master is here, and we actually get revealed that the Master has a higher degree than the Doctor, which I find really funny, because it sort of cements the idea that the Doctor, unlike the new series, in the classic series, the Doctor is not a lonely god. He is kind of a failure in his own society, which is really kind of funny. But because of that, and of course, he figures it out, they go to the plastics factory, and that's where everything ends up from this. But that being said, I do have one major complaint, is that this episode is very much a retread of Terror of Spearhead from Space, at least in setup. So I'm going to give Terror of the Autons Episode 1 an 8 out of 10. Right, it is still the 14th of April 2018, as I've decided to double up on episodes this time because I've been missing so many days. I feel like I may as well, do a little bit of doubling up. That never really hurt anyone, did it? We continue with Terror of the Autons, episode 2. And in this episode, we have the Doctor having to break Jo. We open with the Doctor having to break Jo from the hypnotic suggestion that the Master put on her, which already sort of shows that he kind of does care about her, even if he doesn't necessarily like her 100% like her as a companion as much as he preferred Liz to Jo, and he's still grateful for her help, just over the course of this episode, even though she's not as capable as Liz. It's an interesting way of doing a character. That you have a character who doesn't quite know she isn't perfect. She fails, and she doesn't know how to succeed with everything. You have you have the entire story. You have the entire story dedicated, basically, to having the Doctor. You have the Doctor really being. You have the Doctor being careful. He even tells Jo, don't get in the way. It's dangerous. I don't want you getting hurt. When he goes to investigate the circus where this Professor Phillips from the first episode went missing, which is, you already sort of show that he really does care about Jo. He doesn't want her. He doesn't want her to die. He wants to make sure that he wants her to stay alive. He does care about her, and it's something that I think the story does really well. It really makes you feel, it makes you really feel for Jo, as she just sort of is dealing with all these problems. Like you have Jo, she is essentially working with someone she doesn't really quite know what she's doing. She's a character who's very, very uncertain of herself, which is a really interesting way of doing her as a protagonist. Like she has her issues. She is not perfect. She's just Jo, and that is something that I think that the episode really portrays well. Now, moving on, you have the Master's plan getting more in depth. He demonstrates, first off, this guy McDermott talks to the guy who owns the factory that's been hypnotized. They're like, hey, he doesn't work here. Like, who is he? It's like, oh, no, he's worked here forever. Okay, then why is there no record of him? Which is, kind of hilarious, because it's like, yeah, okay, because if someone worked there would be a record of them working there. It's not, you don't just show up like, oh, well, there's no record, I don't work here. I work here, and there's no record of me. Don't even try to find it, because that's something that I really, really like. I find that this aspect of the episode really funny. So that, of course, then leads to the Master demonstrating. All right, I'm going to demonstrate this chair for you, and this chair, it's a great chair. Just sit in it, and it's made out of plastic. Well, it feels all rubbery. Well, sit in it. He sits in it, and the chair eats him. And it's hilarious yet terrifying at the same time. Like, it's a scene that just, it's weird because it knows how to be scary, which I think is, especially considering you already have just the fact that this is a chair. It's not some sort of it's a chair. And of course the master continues with his evil plans. He leads the doctor to the circus, which allows the doctor to basically be like, hey, the doctor figures everything out. The doctor gets tied up. Joe saves him, and then they get rescued by the police. But then the police turn out to be Autons, and that's our cliffhanger. Like, this episode, it just goes from one thrilling event to the next, and it gives you this plan that the master is going to essentially try to use the Autons to take over the world. I think through suffocation, because that's what happens to Farrell. That was happens to McDermott. That what happens to Farrell's father, who, with this really creepy doll in this really creepy scene. That's like that's a pretty famous scene of this doll just coming alive and strangling this grown man. And it's a really creepy scene. I really like the way that it, I like the way that it builds, and we have everything. You have the doctor. You have the doctor figuring everything out, and then just you build to this conclusion. So I'm going to give Terror of the Autons Episode 2 a 10 out of 10. Alright, it is the 15th of April, 2018. I just finished watching Episode 3 of Terror of the Autons, and this is the episode where the Master's plan comes into full fruition. The Master has obviously been doing some work on the plastics factory, and has essentially realized that, hey, if he is able to get the plastic chair down to a plastic daffodil, and they're going to use that to allow the Autons to invade. Now, that is something that we don't quite get the entirety of how they're going to do it yet, but this is an episode where a lot of stuff is made on how exactly, basically sort of how UNIT has their sort of guards. Like, they can't quite get everything as easily as you'd think they could. They have to still work through everything. You have the doctor. We open with, of course, the doctor essentially escaping the police, and the doctor and Joe, really, they don't quite they still don't, they are actually quite surprised that, like, hey, the police ended up, not only the police ended up attacking them. The idea is that, of course, the police would never do something like that. In real life, it's just one of those horrors, and they begin to piece together. After that, really, the episode is the doctor and the brigadier and UNIT essentially piecing together what's been going on, and mainly what not just what's been going on, but the fact that, hey, the entirety of the plastics, like they realize that the Master has been giving out these plastic daffodils, and it's these plastic daffodils that are being used to essentially kill people. Like, that's how they're doing it. They're killing people by using plastic daffodils, which is something I find really, it's not quite comedic, but it's a very, it's a very, very good, sort of clever way of doing it, because it sort of takes the whole harmless thing, sort of the whole idea of something harmless and, making it something into something evil, which is, obviously these daffodils are, they look completely harmless, and, they are, but they are ones that, but they're things that, you don't want. You wouldn't want you wouldn't want them, really, around people. They're not harmless is the point. They are, they're there to essentially cause problems. Like they are going to allow the Autons to do things. And what I think is great is, oddly enough, is this episode is one where we really get to see what the relationship between the Doctor and the Master really is. Mainly because the Master knows that the Doctor is not, isn't gonna fall for his tricks, and we'll probably get out of it. But he sneaks into Unit, installs a new phone for Unit, basically so that it can be like, so it's like, hey, basically supposed to be like, well, the Doctor likes to walk around. So the new phone is installed, and this new phone, it essentially, this new phone, is one of those things that, and it's not only is it a new phone, but it's a new phone that, when the Master calls, it's got a plastic cord, and our cliffhanger is the cord, being wrapped around the Doctor's neck and strangling him. And that's just, it's a hilarious cliffhanger, and just the episode ends like that. And I really like how that sort of just, how that sort of happens. You have the Master just like, well, I'm gonna kill the Doctor this way because it's fun. So that's just sort of, it's a really good sort of third episode, honestly. It's very good at being a third episode, and it does a really good job at keeping you invested. So I'm going to give Terror of the Autons episode 3 a 10 out of 10. Alright, it is still the 15th of April, 2018, and I just finished watching the final episode of Terror of the Autons, episode 4, and I have to say that as an episode, it is the perfect conclusion to the story, mainly in the fact that this story concludes with the Brigadier getting an airstrike ordered in to destroy the factory, the chemicals, while the Master comes to gloat to the Doctor that his plans won't succeed, and the Autons essentially betraying the Master. They don't keep up their end of the bargain. They're the ones who they're the ones who don't make it through to the end of everything. They don't keep their bargains. I do have to say, I think it's an interesting design compared to the design in Spearhead, but I still think it works, especially because this one is doing much more, doing it in sort of a bigger form, you could say, for the sort of the what the story is doing, and I find that interesting, as well as everything working for, sort of everything really working out for the Doctor and Jo. They really work together as a team, and we sort of we get everything to be a family. Like, Mike Yates, it turns out the daffodils are the reason the doctor discovers what the actual plan is because the daffodil sprays plastic, which essentially suffocates everybody, but it's only because, and the only reason we find out is because Joe happens to get a face full of it, and that's basically what I'm saying is that this episode everything just sort of falls together really nicely, and the Master is defeated after having to team up with the Doctor. They think they catch him, but nope, it's a guy in a Master mask, which is who they accidentally shoot and kill. And we finish the story with some really decent plot points, and we have this big final line of, "Oh, the Master will try again. I'm certain of it." And I'm hoping for it. And so, that's the end of the story. So I'm going to give Terror of the Autons episode 4 a 10 out of 10. That being said, we add up the scores for all 4 episodes of Terror of the Autons to give the Terror of the Autons a final score of 9.5 out of 10. Thank you everybody for watching this episode of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon, and I'm glad I'm able to get this out quickly, as next time we will be taking on the next televised story with The Mind of Evil.